At its very core, drug science must remain independent. This means we don't accept sponsorships. It's with the support of the drug science community we're able to do this and make the podcast in the first place. If you're able to become a drug science community member and support the show, you too will be supporting the dissemination of evidence-based drug policies. Without you, none of this would be possible. For anybody interested, there's a link in the show notes. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the Drug Science Podcast with me, David Nutt. Here we're bringing together experts and activists for a rational, honest and informed conversation about drugs.
Hello and welcome to the Drug Science Podcast with me, Jo Neal, and Hannah Thurger. We're hosting together today. We have an absolutely brilliant guest for you today, folks, and we've an awful lot to discuss about professional sports careers, serious life-limiting injury that occurred to our guest, the mental distress that followed, and the healing power of psychedelics in the natural environment. So without further ado, that guest is Rory Lamont, and he is a former international Rugby Union player. He played for the Glasgow Warriors, the Sale Sharks, Toulon, and of course, Scotland. And while he was representing Scotland in the 2012 Six Nations tournament, he suffered a career-ending leg break. That was followed by a debilitating health crisis which derailed his life and led him to look for alternative healing with psychedelic plant medicines. And I had the pleasure of meeting Rory very recently at the Scottish Indigenous Apothecary event in Edinburgh. And that culminated in a fantastic event at the Scottish Parliament. So I'd like to do a quick shout out for the Scottish Psychedelic Research Group. They hosted the events. It was 3 events over 3 days. And this was led by Anna Ross, who also works with drug science, and Fiona Gilbertson from Recovering Justice. So a very warm welcome, Rory.
Well, thank you, Jo. Thank you for that introduction. It's really wonderful to be on here. I've been familiar with, drug science and, particularly Professor Nutt's journey and being, outspoken man, really, and standing in the truth of the science behind many different drugs and substances. So, thank you for welcoming me on board here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you. And yes, of course, David Nutt is a legend and very brave, extremely passionate and hugely knowledgeable. He's an extraordinary character. We have a lot of fun working with him, don't we, Hannah?
Oh, we love it. It's fantastic.
Learn something every day. Okay, so Rory, I think people will really want to hear your story, what happened to you. But I guess we should start with your career as a rugby kind of superstar. Maybe would you sort of following in the footsteps of your brother?
Yeah, very much so. I came into rugby, professional rugby, through the back door. I'd been trying to make it as a professional, but from about the age of 17, started suffering from injuries, just like some bad injuries, groin injuries. And meanwhile, my brother had been having his first professional contract with Glasgow Warriors. This is before he was playing for Scotland. And he kind of inspired me to keep going after I'd been kind of like tossed aside by Northampton Saints Academy. Anyway, I ended up moving up to Scotland, moving in with him, and thought, well, this is a place. If I'm going to make it into professional rugby, this is probably the place to do it. Sean's making a name for himself. I'll join one of the local teams who had been feeding the professional team. Anyway, very, very quickly, I think my brother had actually spoken to the Glasgow coaches and said, my brother's here and he's better than me, which was probably not true, but it was very generous of him. But the Glasgow coaches then invited me in to train, and that was the rest is history. Six months later, after that, I was representing Scotland in the Six Nations, which was just the most...
Whoa, that seems very quick.
It's much unheard of, really. I'd been binned from the Northampton Saints Academy, so not deemed good enough for the under 21s team. But yeah, just when I came up to Scotland, everything just started flowing really beautifully, and being in that professional environment, and the coaches showing an interest and showing a lot of faith in me, just brought the best out of me, and everything just went, after years of difficulties with injuries, everything just went incredibly well. And yeah, just I guess kind of it really felt like magic happened in my life. The transformation, achieving childhood dreams, and I definitely had a bit of imposter syndrome when I was getting my first cap. I'd only played a handful of games for Glasgow at the time.
Rory, stupid question. What's a cap?
Okay, so is when they used to give out caps for every international game that you play when you represent your country. They don't give you a cap for every game now, but you get, when you play for your country, it's called a cap. So I played for Scotland 29 times over 9 years, and therefore I had 29 caps. So the first cap is always a significant point. When people get to the 50th and the 100th cap, that tends to be a landmark point as well. But I never got that far. I was dealt with a lot of injuries in my career and had quite a short career. 9 years is actually quite short compared to some.
So what age did you start then? You said injuries by the age of 17. That seems young.
Yeah. I mean, I started at 11 years old. Oof. And everything. And everything. And then some people start at 7, 8 years old playing tag rugby. I was actually really into football. That was my number one sport, but the family weren't really interested in football, and they kind of pulled me across into rugby, really kind of against my will, but I surrendered to it. And, I think I scored a try the first time I ever touched the ball in a game, and that was me kind of hooked into rugby. And it kind of just, the football slipped away to the side over a couple of years after that.
Very interesting. So family interest in rugby. So, okay, so you're playing, it's all going really well, but it's a rough game, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of insane, really. When I watch it now, I'm just like, wow, just looking at the punishment the players are going through. And it's, there's one thing in the matches that's so physical. It's so fierce. Look, the games are so fierce, but people don't understand that the training is also fierce. So everything you're doing in games at the weekend, you're doing at least two or three times, or that's how it was when I was a player. You'd be doing really intense contact drills and intense like contact sessions where you're taking lots of impact. So you're getting lots of head blows. You're getting, guys getting injured in training. But obviously in the game, there's everything is on the line. It's kind of this simulation of war. I would say it's that kind of mindset where you're willing to put your body on the line, win at all costs. And you're willing to kind of sacrifice your body for the greater good, which in my case, my body wasn't really built for it. It's interesting. My brother, he was very robust, rarely got any injuries.
Rory, he talks about the self-preservation gene, your brother.
Yeah. Which he always said I lacked. So there was definitely that aspect. I really went and.
Sorry, can you sort of put your body on the line and still preserve yourself? It seems like counterintuitive, really.
I guess there's a point where it becomes the sacrificing yourself, and then there's kind of like that unconscious death urge, which might have been from Freudian psychology, might have been playing out in my situation where I was just was unwilling to yield in any situation, really. And as a fullback and winger in the position I played, it's a lot of going up for, leaping for the ball in the air and colliding with people at high speed when keeping the eye on the ball. So in my case, quite often I'd get head injuries through that situation in the game. So, but yeah, I definitely probably lack that self-preservation that maybe kicks in with some other players.
And head injury, that just seems so dangerous.
Yeah, but it was really interesting during my time as a professional player. It really wasn't spoken about much at all. It was treated like any other injury, except you'd have to go through after a knockout or a concussion, which would be a regular occurrence for me, fairly regular. You would go through the return to play protocols, which is a series of cognitive tests that you do on a computer and also with the physio or a doctor. But they were pretty easy to cheat because you set your baseline while you're supposedly fit. So you do the test and set your baseline cognitive performance, and you've got to meet that baseline after you've had a head injury. But that in pre-season, when you're setting this baseline. You don't want to perform too well, otherwise you're going to make it difficult for you to get back onto the pitch after you've had an injury. So guys deliberately, do poorly on it, and even so, I'd say it's not a reliable measure of the damage to a brain. Like you can still pass these tests even when you've got significant damage, to your neurons, to your cells. So, I was regularly returning to play, maybe, sometimes a week after being knocked out or suffering a concussion, because I could pass the return to play protocols. But there's no, I was still having symptoms. Every time I'd have an impact, I'd be getting headaches and blackouts, and that would go on for, a number of weeks afterwards. So it was definitely the safety protocols around head injuries were just not up to scratch. And rugby is still struggling to reach a state where the managing head injuries appropriately. It's a difficult position for them because the teams and the game needs to thrive, but they can't be ruling out players with concussion all the time. Otherwise, it's just financially unsustainable.
Has there been any progression, Rory, in changing the protocols for managing these type of traumas?
Hey, I'm not in the game anymore, so I don't know the ins and outs. I still see that there's players getting concussed and returning to play, within 7 days of that concussion. And, a bruised leg won't heal in 7 days. So just because we can't see the brain, we're just assuming that the brain injury is over because they've passed the cognitive tests. There's been a lot of changes. When I retired in 2013, I caused a bit of a stink by speaking to the journalists about rugby's mismanagement of concussion, which at the time that there hadn't really been much spoken about it. But for the first time, I felt, because I was no longer bound by my contract, I felt an obligation because I'd witnessed what was happening with NFL.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good point.
I was seeing what the lawsuit and litigation happening in the NFL, and I was really paying attention to what was happening in rugby, and obviously with my own journey and witnessing what was happening with other players, and really wasn't in a position when I was still contracted to be able to speak out about what I saw was mismanagement and poor medical conduct, really. So I spoke out when I retired, and it caused a bit of a reaction. And I was speaking about rugby in general, but the BBC have attacked the Scottish Rugby Union, and who were my former employers, or one of my former employers, and so they had to get a bit defensive. But what happened from that? It sparked a conversation, and the conversation hasn't really stopped since that point. It got the ball moving, I would say, and since that point, there has been a huge amount of discussion around the brain injuries and management of concussions. But rugby is a brutal sport. I don't know how it can make it safe and keep it as it's in its pure form.
Yeah, it is so worrying. I guess they'd have to change the game a bit.
I just think it needs to be informed consent. Just the same way smokers know that when they're smoking cigarettes that it can cause cancer. One thing that's not been spoken about is the long-term effects. Well, I mean, it is spoken about, but the rugby authorities aren't admitting that rugby contributes to CTE, which is the chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is the sportsman's early onset dementia that some of my ex-teammates have had the diagnosis of.
So sad.
So because they won't admit that rugby is part of the story there and part of the cause, because they're fearful of litigation, it's not informed consent. And I think this has got to be there. It's like, the players probably need to accept that they are risking their long-term mental health by playing this game. And then it's like, well, if you want to play this, at least it's informed consent. So that's still missing at the moment. And yeah, the rugby's been trying to change the rules and changing the tackle rules, and it's struggling because it is affecting the way the game is played, and it's causing a lot of upset to the purists and who want to protect the game as it is. So there's this conflict of interest between maintaining the game of rugby in its purest form and also player welfare and long-term health implications.
Yeah, very interesting. the idea of informed consent. So we're used to it, aren't we, Joe, in clinical trials, whereby participants have to give their informed consent, where they understand the potential short-term effects, the long-term effects. And obviously with psychedelics, it's a very contentious subject because gaining consent for psychedelics is actually a very tricky subject. How do you explain the psychedelic experience to someone who's completely naive? So the idea of informed consent in sports is new to me. I'm not a rugby player at all, but I think is a great idea. So thinking about the long-term consequences for some rugby players, could you just go into a bit more detail about that and what people might face and how common they are?
Well, yeah. I mean, what's happening right now is there's a litigation class kind of lawsuit like there was with the NFL. With I'm not sure how many rugby players they've got. I think at the moment they're starting with there's maybe 10 internationals. Don't quote me on the figures, but 10 former internationals who are, I guess, taking a lawsuit against the English Rugby Union, the Welsh Rugby Union, and World Rugby, I think. But there's also another maybe 200 players, and it's ever growing. It might be bigger than that now, that are going to be in the second stage of the litigation. And these are players who are struggling, who have been really struggling in silence. And this is the issue here: is like once you are spent through injury or your age gets the better of you, you really cut adrift, and you're dealing with the long-term ramifications of not you've got the injuries to the body. So that's like me, I have a struggle with my ankle from a broken leg, an injured ankle that ended my career, but also the main ones, the cognitive issues and the ability to function and manage their life because of the long-term effects of concussion, depression, anxiety, like inability to make the good decisions. It's the ability to like navigate just life, really. First of all, because you're institutionalized as a professional player. It's like the military. This is what you've been dedicating your life to from a young age, and that's all you've ever really dreamed of. And here you are, so in my case, I was 29 years old. I had my contract terminated for being injured, and that's right now what? Now what is, and I was dealing with the ramifications from my bodily injuries, but also, for me, I definitely had effects from the concussions. That I was knocked out 10 times during my out clean 10 times during my 9 years as a professional player. I had many more concussions on top of that. And so there's no doubt that there was, the effects of the brain trauma affecting where I was. And, after I retired, I had a very complicated process after retiring because there was multiple issues going on for me, but I definitely was struggling with my mental health for sure.
So what did happen then when you retired?
Yeah, so for me, it was, like my retirement was kind of I felt like I was actually being put out of my misery because I'd been bouncing from one injury to another all through my career. And being injured as a sportsman is one of the worst places to be. It's very mentally challenging. And really, yeah, so I retired from a broken leg that I got playing for Scotland against France in the 2012 Six Nations. Tried for that full year to get back fit, and it just wasn't healing. And so my contract was torn up 12 months after the injury. And I was kind of like looking forward to really moving forward with my life and like putting rugby behind me and finding maybe a more peaceful way of living.
Less dangerous.
Less dangerous for sure. I was ready, to be honest. I was ready to be out. It was like I'd had enough. But I had the complication of having to have surgeries on my leg that was still not really healing. I was struggling to walk, and had 2 more surgeries. And after one of the surgeries, I got an infection in the ankle and was put on antibiotics. And as soon as the antibiotics were finished, my digestive system stopped working, and I was struggling to eat anything. And as the weeks went on, there was less and less foods I could eat. I lost 4 stone in 4 months.
Whoa.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was my digestive system just shut up shop. It just like, right, I'm done. And yeah, I was just going through this really intense process with my body, and had loads of other symptoms popping up. I had like neurological things like like muscle spasms and and also like heart palpitations and insomnia. Yeah, so my body felt like it was really breaking down. So I was navigating this as well as having a broken leg that I couldn't really walk on. It was incredibly painful to walk, so I was kind of housebound in a real bad way. And naturally, my mental health kind of imploded as well. I was mourning the loss of my career, which is always tough for a sportsman, but also mourning the loss of my future because I couldn't see a way forward from like how I went to see the doctors, and the doctors, basically said there's nothing wrong with you. And I was just, well, in terms of my digestive system, which was kind of, insane, really. And so, yeah, I felt really cut adrift. The Rugby Union had ended my medical support for my leg as well. So I no longer had private health insurance. So I was stuck on NHS waiting times to get more surgery, try to get the ankle fixed. So, yeah, I was really in this difficult place. And I came to the realization that for me, it was kind of clear that the antibiotics were the straw that broke the camel's back after years of taking huge amounts of pharmaceutical drugs. And this is, a big part of my journey that hasn't really been spoken about too much. But with all the injuries and surgeries I had, which was a lot, came out a raft of pharmaceutical drugs for different things.
For pain, or what sort of drugs were you given?
Yeah, pain relief, things like tramadol and codeine and paracetamol, cocodamol. And, in France, there was benzos handed out. There's something called tetrazepam.
Oh.
Like sleeping pills, Zopiclone, Zopiderm.
Yeah.
There's anti-inflammatories, sodium diclofenac, meloxicam. And then with the surgeries, over 20 surgeries since I was 20.
Oh, that's just so many more than anybody.
Aesthetics and like exposure to morphine, OxyContin, just a lot of, and I was popping painkillers every day throughout my career because it was, with every injury, it becomes harder and harder to get out on the field, and there's huge pressure to train and to play. So at least when I played, there was myself and quite a lot of other players were kind of like dependent on the pain relief to be able to play. And of course, back then I was very naive and trusting. I thought all these substances were safe and effective, and I wasn't aware. I didn't even think about the long-term repercussions of these things. But it's the best part of 10 years popping these pills every day, you pretty much, and some of them are highly addictive. The tetrazepam, the opioids, and the benzos, of course. And I witnessed, at times there was addiction there for me, and I also saw it in many other players, other teammates who were dependent on these, and it becomes psychological and for the physical, for the performance.
And you were given no sort of education about that when you were given drugs like benzodiazepines or opioids? That's
no level of naivety there really was. It was, and I think that the culture back then was quite different because it was at the time, I guess, when the opioid crisis was really kind of taking place in the US, and some of these, I don't know, some of the things coming out onto the market, they hadn't been out on the market for that long. And just within the culture, there was an overall sense of trust in the medical system and the pharmaceutical method, which I feel people are much more cautious and aware now than they've ever been before. But I was the pharmaceutical poster boy, just full trust, taking these things without any concern at all. And the truth is, without them, I wouldn't have had the career I did, because I wouldn't have been able to train or play, certainly at the level that I needed to. So, yeah, they played their part in helping me play, but there was long-term ramifications that I just wasn't prepared for.
So that is a culture, Rory, that needs to change in the game.
I believe it has. I am under the impression my brother is still involved in the game. He's a fitness coach, conditioning coach, and he said it's much tighter control now than there was when I was a player. When I was in France, and in France, they've got an incredible pharmaceutical cultures. There's a pharmacy on just about every street in the town. In France, these things were just on the side in the physio room. Players would just go pick them up themselves, take them themselves, sometimes without, asking. And yeah, when I was in France at Toulon, there was multiple players at various times hooked on some of these, the tetrazepam or the tramadol. And of course, you take them for pain initially, and then of course, they're highly, highly addictive, and they leave you feeling terrible when you try to come off as well. There's horrendous withdrawal from them.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's good to hear that, with your brother and things have changed quite a lot. There's much more knowledge and much better education now and understanding of these things. I was always struck when talking to the combat veterans. Clearly, you've had a lot of trauma, not all that dissimilar, I don't think, to the things that they've experienced, but that physical trauma as well. But the use of alcohol, I wonder, is that the case? Elite sports, probably not so much.
Alcohol, not really. I mean, on one level, there would be binge drinking. So again, I think it's changed now. So camera phones have stopped rugby players going out drinking anymore. But when I was a player, after the game, not after every game, but after some games, there'd be the excitement about going out for a few drinks together. And of course, rugby players are kind of like extreme athletes and extreme behaviors, so pushing to the edge on everything. And so the binge drinking would be like really strong, and there'd be a lot of it. Not all the players, but a lot of the players, and not all the time, but some of the time. Certainly when I retired, like I was in a health crisis, so the physical issues stopped me turning towards any kind of at least any alcohol. And I was highly, in my crisis, I knew the pharmaceutical route was not the answer. I didn't want to go. I didn't, because I was dealing with depression and anxiety. I was having suicidal ideation, and I just knew that going to the GP, that was like, well, here takes an antidepressant. Just take this for your anxiety. I knew the pharmaceutical route wasn't the answer to my problem, because I had this awareness that this had been a significant part of what led me into where I was in with this health crisis that I was in, with body, mind, and spirit.
Yeah. So I think our listeners will really want to hear about how you found psychedelic experience, really, and what led you to that, and how was it, I think.
Yeah. So, truth be told, the first time I had a psychedelic experience was with psilocybin, with mushrooms, in 2008. I was still a professional player. It was not long after I had probably the worst head injury of my career. I had a real bad head injury. I took a knee to the face, which caused, I think it was 8 fractures to the eye socket, cheekbone, and jaw, and I had a facial reconstruction. I was knocked out, like clean out, into a seizure for 5 or 6 minutes, and was stretchered off and taken to hospital. And that was the first time I was like, Rory, you should probably retire from this game, because you're doing yourself a lot of damage. But it wasn't long after that, a few months after that, while I was out injured, I tried psilocybin for the first time, and I think it was something I'd been naturally drawn to just through all the research and information about dealing with like for psychological issues. I was kind of dealing with a bit of a depression at the time, and to be honest, it did really help. It completely kind of transformed my mindset, and in many ways. So that was the first time I'd actually experienced it. So it had always been on my radar. I'd been paying attention to all the research coming out. I'd been listening to people's stories about ayahuasca over the years. But when I came to my crisis in 2013, when I was down and out, to be honest, I thought about psilocybin to try and navigate the depression and suicidal ideation that I was dealing with. And it was daily suicidal ideation that I was kind of stuck in. I felt such a bad way. I couldn't see a way forward. And I was in so much physical and emotional pain that if this continues for much longer, I have to take my own life, because it was excruciating, all aspects. Just like I felt like I was in a torture chamber, and I was in this kind of this difficult situation for just over a year, and not being able to see a way out. I was always hoping for some kind of intervention. I was hoping someone was going to come and rescue me, because I clearly in this situation couldn't get myself out of it. I was in a real like dark place. And one day I was just listening to a Joe Rogan podcast, and this is 2014, and heard he was interviewing a guy called Aubrey Marcus, who is like a businessman, and also he was sharing his experience with the plant medicine Iboga. And it was maybe he was speaking about it for about 30 minutes. And when I was listening to it, it just, everything he was saying about it, it just sounded like the medicine that I needed in the moment. I just had a full body knowing that this was somehow going to help me. And it would just, like, the lights went on in that moment.
Hello everyone, Dr. Hannah Thurger here. Sorry to interrupt the show, but we have something really exciting that we wanted to share with you all. Drug Science is teaming up with the UK's most prolific psychedelic research centre, Imperial College London, to record a one-off podcast special. But wait, there's more. On Tuesday the 15th of August from 6:30 until 9:30, we're taking the conversation offline and bringing it to the heart of West London. So yes, that's right. Not only are we collaborating with Imperial College for this prestigious podcast episode, this will be a live podcast recording, and you're invited to be a part of our audience. Imperial College is sending us their best and brightest minds for an exclusive insight into the world of psychedelic clinical trials, many of which are not even public knowledge at this point. So mark your calendars for Tuesday the 15th of August. Doors open at 6 p.m. and the podcast recording starts at 6:30 p.m. sharp. And as always, our Drug Science Premium community members will be able to attend this event for free, and will even be invited to participate in the conversation too. We'll have a Q&A session where our community members can ask their burning questions to our panel of experts. So it's a chance to engage directly with the leading minds in the field and ask Dave pretty much anything. Find out how to become a community member by visiting the link in the show notes. Otherwise, tickets are available now. Please see the other link in the show notes. So don't wait too long though, as space is limited and we do expect this event to sell out fast. I look forward to seeing you there. And now back to the show.
So you felt that psilocybin wouldn't help you, but Iboga would this time.
I had been scared of going to psilocybin. I was, for some reason, I was in such a dark place. I was scared that it was going to exacerbate how I felt, magnify how I felt, which, in hindsight was, just a projection of my fear. But it really, it just, and the thought of, doing it on my own and all this kind of thing, for whatever reason, I just ruled it out. So when I hear this, testimonial from Aubrey Marcus, and he attended this Iboga retreat center in Costa Rica, and he spoke about the environment and the space that it was held in. And so I've the thought of doing a psychedelic medicine while supported with caring individuals at a retreat space that does this professionally was a lot more appealing. And just when I heard him speak about it, I just knew this was the thing that was going to help me. And so it was probably only maybe a couple of weeks later I managed to get myself out to Costa Rica, out of just pure desperation, really. Just like, I'm hoping this is going to save my life. And got out there in this Iboga retreat center, and I had, in 10 days, had three flood doses, 3 ceremonies with this very powerful African plant medicine. And it really, in that 10-day window, my whole understanding of who I was, what this life is, what my situation was, everything had been lifted. My perspective had been lifted. And after the first ceremony, which I was kind of like disappointed with, because I didn't really get all the experiences that I'd heard that Iboga could offer. I was getting, some visions, but it wasn't really any kind of mystical experience.
This is something that we hear quite a lot. I was talking to a combat veteran a couple of weeks ago. Similar thing with ayahuasca. 2 ceremonies even didn't really, he'd had horrendous trauma from Afghanistan war. So that didn't really, even the second experience did help him a bit with the experiences of the war. But after that, the shaman said to him, no, we're not done. We need to do another couple of ceremonies, and gave him something called Cascabar, which I've never heard of. So mixed a different brew. And he said, and that's when it all happened, So, yeah, it sounds quite a similar maybe experience.
Yeah. So while the experience I was a little bit disappointed with, although it was still quite a powerful process. It's a strong, Iboga is a very strong medicine, and I don't recommend anyone to just go seek it out anywhere, because it's a very strong medicine. You want to make sure that you're in a safe space with your well-intentioned practitioners who are experienced and have medical support as well. But having said that, the depression and the negativity, the negative loop that I'd been stuck in, was just switched off. Just after one ceremony, just all this optimism kind of returned to me, and it was quite remarkable. It's like a switch had just been flipped. And then a couple of days later, I had a second ceremony, which was one of the most difficult experiences I've ever been through. The medicine took me through this life review and showed me all the ways I'd been harming myself. I could just remember everything. It showed me all the drugs, all the pharmaceuticals, all the surgeries, all the injuries, concussions, the knockouts, just made me see it all and have this awareness of everything kind of I'd been through. And it was absolutely terrifying to see the amount of destruction that I'd caused myself through my actions, and through not just through rugby, but also partying and drinking to excess, and just completely living my life out of balance. It's like all the stimulants, the caffeine, it's like pseudoephedrine we used to take as well just before games. Just doing everything possible to really harm myself, not consciously, but it was there, and it was.
And Rory, is that the medicine, or did the shamans help you?
That was just the medicine, myself, and the medicine. And it was, honestly, it was absolutely terrifying. In fact, it was quite overwhelming to see all the ways that I'd been hurting myself. And it really, at one point, I thought, wow, I am going to have to end my life, because there's no way that I can recover from the amount of damage I've done. The message was very clear. It was like, what did you think would happen? Doing all this, living in this way, what did you think would happen? And so there's all this like guilt of the way I've been carrying myself and hurting myself, and just the way I've been living. But then the medicine took me through this life review, from seeing the wounds that I'd experienced during childhood, the trauma, the difficult relationship I had with my father, some of the other experiences as well, that had created this wounds of rejection, really, real intense wounds of rejection and low self-esteem. That was really at the core of my being. The truth is, the suicidal ideation that I've been experiencing for that last year or so, it wasn't the first time I'd experienced it. This was just revisiting emotions from my childhood. I remember being very young and not wanting to be here, and just feeling deep emotional pain. Just not wanting to exist. And I'd experienced that through difficult moments throughout my life, but it really had been disappeared as a professional rugby player, because I had all this material, external success being propped up, the wounds being held up by, I guess, society success.
So you'd kind of forgotten the I suppose, depression in childhood, or feeling suicidal on occasion.
Yeah. So as a child, it was just there was a low self-esteem through wounds of rejection, not feeling loved and really wanted with my father. These childhood experiences that we go through have a profound effect on us in later life. And This was always simmering below the surface, always. And during difficult moments in my adolescence, and even just before as a rugby player, there'd be little moments where these energies would pop up to the surface. But in this crisis after my rugby career, with all my feeling like I've lost everything, like my physical health and my life, my job, my future, all these emotions were just coming up to the surface to be felt. And so during this second Iboga ceremony, I was being taken back and through the difficult experiences that I'd been through, and how these wounds had really shaped my behaviors and my excesses and my willing to sacrifice myself, and it's all through this desire for validation and for love, and it's like the desire to please coaches and teammates, and to be loved and to be liked and to feel connection.
Do you think this was partly to do with your brother, his success?
I don't think so. I think Sean carries the same wound. It just manifests in different ways in his life. He's gone through similar difficulties, but of course we're different human beings, and we respond slightly different to similar wounds. And of course our experiences aren't exactly alike. My father was, by all accounts, was a lot more harsh on me than he was on my brother. So the pain I'd experienced, I think, might have been a little bit greater in some aspects. But to be honest, Sean's success was always a hugely, like, it's a big celebration. I just think at the core of my being, I never really loved myself. I never really felt good enough. And here the medicine was, Iboga was taking me through these wounds and kind of showing me that all the dysfunctional, destructive behavior was rooted in this emotional pain, really. And a lot of it was just unfolding deeply unconsciously in my life. And through that awareness, that, like, it was really, I was just kind of like responding, like living life from my wounds, I found compassion for myself and really forgiveness, because I then realized my life unfolded in the only way that it ever really could, when we're driven by these unconscious energies and these wounds. Until we make them conscious and integrate them into our conscious awareness, we're really controlled by them, and they're driving a lot of our lifestyle choices and behaviors. And so through this compassion for myself and forgiveness, and because it wasn't just myself I'd hurt in my journey, I'd hurt others, loved ones, partners, girlfriends, a lot. So I had to forgive myself for a lot. I'd forgive myself, especially for, like, I'd been judging myself for being a failure after rugby, because I was now in this horrendous situation. I was like, well, I've orchestrated this mess. I'm obviously not good at doing life, like my inability to have, because I was flying so high, I was now rock bottom. And I was like, how did I get here? Well, you're responsible for this. Like, you've got yourself in this mess. And therefore, you're obviously not good at navigating life. So I had to forgive myself for all the mistakes and harm I'd caused myself and the way I'd behaved. And through this compassion and this forgiveness for myself and others, forgiving my father as well for the wounds, because I realized that he was just passing on his wounds to me, his wounds of rejection. So this compassion and love that I could suddenly feel took me into this incredibly blissful state during the ceremony. And I felt this deep connection for myself and gratitude for who I am and everything I've navigated. And the first 8 hours of this experience were, because Iboga is a long medicine, it stays in the system for many, many hours. The first 8 or 9 hours were just pure hell. I was kind of taken into this underworld, visionary, like underworld, very like demonic feeling as I was going through this awareness of all the ways I've been destroying myself. It was a painful space to be in. And then when it got through this point of compassion and forgiveness, I was taken into what would be like going from a hellish situation into a heavenly energy, where I felt bathed in love and compassion and just pure bliss radiating through my entire being. And that really continued. That feeling stayed with me. And then in the hours kind of after the ceremony, all this, like this, I was kind of given a blueprint for moving forward with my life on how to navigate the very big challenges that I was still facing. Because the truth is, nothing had changed. My situation was exactly the same, but my perspective had just been lifted. And now I could see a way forward. Hope had returned. And really, I had another ceremony after that, but that wasn't as, it was really the second ceremony that was the transformational experience for me. And yeah, after that point, everything kind of changed, and my hope had returned, and I started moving forward with my life and naturally connecting to, well, I started connecting with natural healing modalities, breathwork, meditation, and nutrition. And just with this hope, felt inspired to, like, I felt the inner strength to be able to move forward.
It's just extraordinary, Rory, that you have such a healing, process. I mean, I'm guessing 8 hours of being in hell sounds horrendous, actually. Really brave then to do another ceremony, I think. But of course, you came out of it so well. So did you have any, integration coaching or any help to make sense of it? Or kind of did the plant do this for you?
Yeah, it didn't cure my life. It gave me hope. And yeah, the integration, no, there wasn't much integration support. And that's been, that's something I had to find inner strength through this process since that point. That was 2014. Not long after that, life brought the opportunity for me to go to Colombia, just through a series of synchronicities, and sit with the indigenous in Colombia with ayahuasca. And this was really part of my integration, is learning from the indigenous, the way that they see the world, and they look at us in the West, and kind of see us as lost brothers and children who have severed our connection to nature, and we don't really know who we are. And so being in the presence of the indigenous and the indigenous tribes, and sitting in the ceremonies, but also learning the wisdom, that was such a big part of my integration. And I was very lucky that I stumbled across a couple of brothers, Colombian brothers, who just really looked after me and took me on this incredible journey, and were fully invested in helping me heal and integrate all this wisdom, and feeling all that love and support. But yeah, the integration is not an easy process. It's incredibly challenging, and there was definitely a lack of support when I was back in the UK, for sure, and it wasn't without its challenges.
So integration now is often spoken about as this lifelong journey of how you sustain these changes, and we've talked about your other healing modalities. And so, what have you found most useful?
Well, first of all, I had to heal on the physical level, so nutrition, finding out what's the most healing diet, trying to figure that out. That took a long time, but being dedicated to that path of knowing how to feed myself, because diet really matters. We has a profound effect on our body, mind, and spirit. But breathwork, meditation, getting out into nature. I was doing a lot of, we used to do a lot of cold water therapy as professional rugby players, but doing the cold water therapy, sauna therapy, just really, these were the tools that I was reliant on. I did a little bit of talking therapy, which was helpful at times, but I wasn't really so much drawn to that. I was just really connecting with these natural healing tools, these ancient tools, breathwork or meditation, it's like learning how to manage stress being a huge thing. Obviously stress and exposure to adrenaline has a profound effect on our health. It can block us from healing if we've got any health conditions. So meditation and breathwork are really profound because it can really help us build resilience in our body, mind, and spirit, so that when the bombs are going off around us, that we're not feeling triggered, and we can respond in a calm way. But yeah, just getting out into nature as much as possible. But I bought myself a bike so I could, I was struggling to walk, but getting out onto the bike into nature was so exercise, being able to move the body was absolutely key. That getting on the bike was a huge part of my healing journey. We really have to nail nutrition. We have to get our exercise right. We have to learn how to rest and mitigate the stress in our life. And ended up getting a couple of dogs as well, which were incredible therapy. I recommend dogs for healing. They're incredible beings for radiating love and helping us feel that love and peace, which is such an important part of the healing, being able to forgive ourselves for any mistakes we've made in the past and hold compassion for ourselves and others.
And so with Iboga, your differences between your Iboga experience and your ayahuasca experience, is there anything that really stood out?
So yes, there's significant differences. I feel, Iboga just took me to the truth, and it was the harsh truth, and it was incredibly painful. It's kind of, Iboga is likened to a stern grandfather energy, whereas ayahuasca is likened to a grandmother or mother type energy. Doesn't mean with ayahuasca you can still get taken into very difficult spaces with ayahuasca, but these difficult spaces are only aspects of our own psyche. That it's like our fears are coming to the surface, and it's really our fear, that being guided by a fear, that gets us into trouble in life. When we let fear drive our decision making, it generally causes us more problems in our life. And so when we sit with these medicines, we do have to confront fears sometimes, not always. Sometimes you just get taken into like the most beautiful, healing, loving, compassionate experience. But sometimes you have to look at certain aspects of your life or aspects of your psyche, aspects of yourself that you're not accepting, or things that have happened in the past, suppressed memories, suppressed trauma. Sometimes we have to look at that, and it's not always comfortable. It can be deeply uncomfortable, but the catharsis takes place when we get to witness it in a new way and start to integrate the shadow aspects of our psyche and our past. And through that integration, we experience acceptance and healing and self-love, really, which is an absolutely profound part of anyone's healing journey. It doesn't matter whether it's a physical issue or a psychological issue. It's like self-acceptance and self-love is absolutely the profound mechanism that causes healing to take place.
Yeah, self-compassion is a common theme that's now discussed with all different types of psychedelics. And with Iboga, there's lots of interest with Iboga and addiction, and particularly tough addictions, such as opioids. And I'm wondering whether it needs to have that real stern experience that you've described to help people with such tough addictions rather than maybe psilocybin.
Yeah, I'll speak personally for myself. I needed some tough love. I really, I just had to face the truth. And there's compassion that obviously came through, and it came, difficult lesson came once I'd moved through and accepted and faced the truth. The bliss came in. But speaking about addiction, of course, addiction's rooted in really predominantly in pain, stress, and trauma, and whether it's emotional or physical. And so these medicines get to the root of what is the underlying cause of addiction. And I certainly saw, when I was at this Iboga retreat center, I saw people healing their heroin addictions in one ceremony. Iboga is incredible for opioid addiction, and that's where it's, as many benefits for many different people, but it's a remarkable medicine for addressing opioid addiction and other addictions. But one of the men was there that I was in ceremony with said it was just like that overnight, the draw was, it just been switched off. The addiction had been switched off.
Incredible. We have to bring this into the NHS, don't we? But in an ethical, way.
Yes, of course. The potential is there, but we need to look into it. We like this, obviously the science, we looked into it, and there's so much untapped potential with these medicines and ayahuasca. Ayahuasca as well is just incredibly powerful medicine for addressing the root cause of addiction, mental health issues, and sometimes physical health issues are rooted in trauma. Quite often physical issues are rooted in emotional trauma and pain from the past that's just not being looked at or addressed. So they have incredible potential, but they need to be used obviously safely, and they're just not for anyone to self-serve or these medicines are powerful and used in the wrong hands, they can cause problems for people. And also they're not for everyone. I think with people who have severe neurological conditions or mental, psychosis outbreaks in the past, psychotic breaks, these medicines maybe aren't for them, but there's so many people who can potentially benefit from these. And so, that's why I'm speaking about my journey, because I really think that these medicines have saved my life and they've brought so much joy, and I'm the happiest now I've ever been. And a huge part of the healing process is learning how to integrate these experiences into your life. And I think now there's all sorts of integration coaches, and there's so much support in this country and in other countries. There's so many options for integration support, which probably wasn't there just 10 years ago or so. It's the whole landscape has completely transformed since I first connected with them.
And your other point about how much we have to learn from Indigenous people about these plant medicines.
The Indigenous hold wisdom and knowledge about the nature of reality, about who we are, that has been lost somehow in our lineage. And I'm sure at one point our ancestors had this awareness, but the way I see it, the Indigenous are playing a fundamental role in helping humanity heal as a collective. Indigenous wisdom has been coming into the West. We're at this magical point where, out of this chaos that's happening on the planet, we've got Eastern wisdom coming, Buddhism and Hinduism and some of these ancient wisdoms. And now we've got also, and of course, yoga. And then we've got, the Indigenous wisdom from the Amazon and the Americas that is coming in. And we've got this incredible melting pot where there's the opportunity to heal now is absolutely incredible. It's something my father, who died of alcoholism last year, he never had the opportunity to really connect with these tools, and this wisdom wasn't around for him. And so I witnessed his painful journey, and I was on a path for that same pain. And but these medicines were the intervention that deviated my life onto a higher path, onto a healing path. And I'm so grateful to the Indigenous tribes for their love and generosity to share their wisdom and share their medicines with us. And there's been probably millions of Westerners like myself who have journeyed to the Amazon to connect with their wisdom and connect with their medicines, and come back and really share the message that the Indigenous carry. And we have this through our scientific material attitude in the West. We have an arrogance. We look down upon the Indigenous, and we have so much to learn from them. That arrogance is holding us back as a civilization, that we need to integrate the Indigenous wisdom. And once we do that, we will become a much more sane, balanced, and loving humanity.
And it's so badly needed, isn't it? After the pandemic, and the mental health of people is so bad, of many people is so bad now. Rory, thank you so much. It's been fantastic, hasn't it, Hannah?
Oh, incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your story. So, what a story, Jo.
Oh, just marvellous, folks. And, I'm delighted to tell you how well and happy Rory is now, how great he looks, beaming from ear to ear, just looks fantastic now. And it's been a real privilege hearing your story. And I think the trauma of the sport, being an elite athlete, ending your career ended rather, rather abruptly. But the sort of physical trauma, it's been really fascinating to hear. I don't really know. Hannah and I are not rugby experts. Fascinating to hear about that. And the story of healing is just absolutely marvellous. It's been fantastic. A real privilege talking to you. For the listeners, there's great information about drugs on the Drug Science website. We have a section on Iboga, on Ayahuasca, and psilocybin, on all these medicines. So do log on there. I was looking this morning, certainly refreshed my knowledge and learned a lot.
All the drug information pages are great to kind of give you an overview of those drugs, as well as, it's a good opportunity just to raise the ethical and sustainable concerns with some of these psychedelics. Lots of information out there already if you're interested in finding out about reciprocity schemes for Ibogaine and for Ayahuasca. Really, really worth reading into those. And we've got a great blog post, actually, Jo, from a student as well on some of the reciprocity issues. So give that a read on the Drug Science website as well.
That's brilliant. So thank you very much, Rory.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me on here. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.